And it's a great pleasure to chair the next talk, which is continuing our theme for today, this time on the science and ethics of caring for creation, by Professor Calvin DeWitt, who's come across from the States especially, so we're very grateful to you for travelling. He's one of the, if I may say this, one of the grand old men of environmental care, from a Christian's perspective, by which I mean that in a good way, because he really got going on this actually a long time ago, didn't you? He's been pushing this for a long time, and the rest of us are just catching up with him, I guess. So actually it must be a pleasure to you to see other, the Christians at least taking this on board at last. It takes, I don't know how long memes take, we'd have to ask Richard Dawkins, but I think it must take several decades for a meme to penetrate through the peer group. Calvin is he's Professor of Environmental Science at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He was also founding director and is now President Emeritus of the Osavo Institute, and that's a Christian institute concerned with with environmental beliefs, and he's Professor of Environmental Science, as I said, so he's had a long involvement in this topic and prepared many students, has influenced many hundreds of students actually through the years, and has written and has certainly influenced a lot of people worldwide to think clearly about environmental issues from Christian perspectives. So it's a great pleasure to have him today, and without further ado, I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
The focus of my presentation this morning will be from page 4 of the Yale paper. That is the Science, Ethics, Praxis Triad, and I'll be explaining that in more detail, but just briefly, what I'll be dealing with is the relationships between science, which deals with the question, how does the world work? And ethics, which deals with the question, what ought to be? And praxis, which deals with the question, then what must we do? So it's that framework, the science, ethics, praxis triad, that I'll be focusing my attention. But to begin, I would like to put the presentation in the context of the various religions of the world. And I'm going to cite to you statements that come from 9 of these great world religions, and these are presented in the Yale paper, and I'll begin there by starting on page 3 with a definition of religion, as it has been given by a distinguished professor of language and literature of the University of Chicago, Wayne C. Booth. So our context here is a religious and scientific one, and I see Wayne C. Booth's definition here as one that we perhaps can broadly embrace across all religions and all faiths. Wayne C. Booth defines religion as follows: religion is the passion or the desire both to live right, not just to live, but to live right, and to spread right living. Both desires conceived as responses to some sort of cosmic demand. That is, to a demand not made to us by the way things are, that is, to a demand made to us by the way things are, by the way the world is, by the nature of nature, as some would say, or by God himself, as explicitly some religious people put it. So religion as a passion to live right and to spread right living is an important definition. And in terms of our topic, the care and keeping of creation, right living is really what we're about, and what has happened in the last few years, certainly in the last decade, but most importantly, since we have received the most recent report of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what constitutes right living also embraces climate care. It also embraces the whole issue of what we do in relationship to the climate system, which provides the sustainability not only for human life, but for all human life on earth. And so as we move to these various religions and see what they're telling us, first I'm going to convey to you very summary statements from various world religions out of the Assisi Declaration, which are listed on the Yale paper number 3. From Buddhism, destruction of the environment and life depending upon it is a result, and the life depending upon it is a result of ignorance, greed, and disregard for the richness of all living beings. From Hinduism, we should declare our determination to halt the present slide toward destruction, to rediscover the ancient tradition of reverence for all life. From Judaism, now, when the whole world is in peril, when the environment is in danger of being poisoned and various species, both plant and animal, are becoming extinct, it is our responsibility to put the defense of nature at the very center of our concern. From Christianity, we repudiate all ill-considered exploitation of nature, which threatens to destroy it. From Islam, people, as God's trustees, are responsible for maintaining the unity of His creation, the integrity of the earth, its flora and fauna, its wildlife and natural environment. And then from statements made by the Alliance for Religion and Conservation, I'll pick up a few additional faiths. The first one, Baha'i. The grandeur and diversity of the natural world are purposeful reflections of the majesty and bounty of God. Skipping down to Jainism, avoiding violence toward all of nature is a fundamental doctrine, resulting in reverence for all life in all forms, and leading to compassion for all living beings. From Sikh, the purpose of humanity is to serve the world and protect all of creation. From Taoism, humanity follows the earth follows heaven, heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows what is natural. So these provide a kind of affirmation that religion really is the passion to live rightly and to spread right living, and particularly on our topic, to do so in the context of caring for this remarkable biosphere in which we find ourselves living, not only as participants, but now most recently as a major geological force that has a great deal of impact on the sustainability of the life systems that support this remarkable earth. When you look at the starting page of the Lambeth paper, you'll see a summary of what I think characterizes and describes this remarkable system of which we are a part, the biosphere. Creation is a symphony of material and life cycles empowered by Earth's star, the sun, whose energy drives global circulations of air and water, flows shaped by unequal heating and varied topography of land above and below the sea. Solar energy captured by green plants fuels molecule to molecule and organism to organism transfers, helping to weave Earth's integrative biogeographic and trophic fabric that interlaces all life. Its creatures produce and consume, multiply and diminish, develop and decompose, each with peculiar roles in sustaining its biospheric integrity. This is creation's economic fabric, creation's economy. As we human creatures are part of this fabric, we also are its stewards. Stewards of this symphonic gift, stewards with divine appointments to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. Unfolding in the canon of Scripture vindicated in Christ's resurrection, and celebrated in the Holy Eucharist, this economy is the comprehensive contemporary context of Christian mission. So I state for the Anglicans. And also with some modification to anyone, anywhere throughout the entire world. In the Lambeth paper, I'd like you to turn then to page 3, where in addition to what Bob White has addressed about the status of the world climate system, I would like to summarize our current situation in the biosphere, and particularly in terms of the degradations that we are experiencing today as a result of human activity. So toward the bottom of the page, number 1, biogeographic restructuring of the life of the land. One of the things that I see as a scientist happening across the face of the entire Earth is we are restructuring the biospheric and biogeographic systems that sustain Earth. It's something that we quite naturally do. We convert prairies into agricultural lands. We produce wood out of forests that once were natural forests and they might be converted into other uses. We convert land from natural habitats into urban environments. So this has been part and parcel of human development over many, many years. It, of course, is increasing as our numbers increase and as our ability to multiply our own muscle power by machine power also increases. The second, trophic restructuring of the life of the sea. Trophic here means nourishing. The way in which ecosystems and individuals that are part of these ecosystems live and move and have their being is from the transfer of energy, ultimately from our star, the sun, and to a more limited extent from chemosynthesis deep in the oceans. And this energy is transferred in food webs to empower all life. And that structure of transfer from the sun to plants, to consumers of these plants, and then consumers of those consumers, that has been seriously disrupted in our oceans. So much so that our large predators in the oceans are virtually eliminated, and increasingly we feed upon, in our fisheries, upon the next trophic level and on through. So we are experiencing what can be called a microbialization of the oceans. We are progressively eliminating the structure of the seas and the way that their energy flows from organism to organism. A third degradation is the one that Bob White has so well addressed, and that is global carbon imbalance. As you read more of this paper and other papers, you'll discover that there was a metaphor that we once used, particularly in the West, of creation as a book. Creation for well over 2,000 years has been looked upon as a book which we can read and from which we can understand how rightly to live on earth, particularly if it's accompanied with our scriptures. And what happened during industrialization is that we gradually replaced this metaphor of earth as a book to earth as a bag of resources. And what we're doing now is we're even applying misnomers to many of these great pages in the books of the history of the earth, so that we are left with no recourse but to think of them as resources, not as pages in a book. For example, the word fossil fuel is now used instead of the word coal or oil very largely. And as soon as you call it fossil fuel, you're thinking not as reading it as a book from which to learn, but as a resource to be exploited. In fact, I, as a wetland ecologist and a wetland scientist, know is that in these great books of carbon deposits are pages upon pages, layers upon layers of pollen, of seeds, of the records of the past. They really are books of history. And as soon as we stop thinking of coal and peat and these great wetlands as books, we think of them as fuels. We begin to do something like moving on the Cambridge University libraries and thinking, look how well this fuel is stacked. Shelf after shelf after shelf, and we can use this to heat our rooms by just burning these nice little compact energy packets in our stoves, and they will give us great warmth. That is the problem in the shift of metaphor that we have experienced since industrialization. So the result is carbon imbalance. These are three major degradations. There are many more. And the key here, I think, for understanding this is to go to page 1 of the Lambeth paper and look at William Blake's great epic, Jerusalem. What I've done here is something that Blake, I think, did not do. I've converted what he has said into a diagram. And here what I do is to complement what he's saying in the text about wheels with a diagram. And what he's saying is that we can look at the creation's economy as a big wheel and the human economy as a little wheel. So shown here is a big wheel, which is creation's economy, and a little wheel, which is the human economy. And what he does in his writing is to say, if the little economy is put outside creation's economy, it moves in an opposite direction. And that causes degradation. It is a satanic mill. It grinds away at the fabric of the earth. But if the human economy is put within creation's economy, it moves in the same direction. And what we have done, of course, that has fostered the development of these degradations is to move the human economy outside of creation's economy, pretending, I suppose, that we really run the world with stock markets, with investments, with technological development. And in fact, it's the other way around. The world forms the framework within which our economy must operate. And so on the top of this page, from this wonderful Swedish scientist and biologist Linnaeus in 1791, we read one of the first definitions of economy written in our day in the West. By the economy of nature, we understand the all-wise disposition of the Creator in relation to natural things, by which they are fitted to produce general ends and reciprocal uses. All things contained in the compass of the universe declare, as it were, with one accord, the infinite wisdom of the Creator. It is interesting also that in the third edition of Webster's unabridged dictionary, that economy is defined as a remarkable way in which the Creator of the universe matches ends and means in its governance. So the economy, as measured in pounds, guilder, euros, and dollars, is an economy of rather recent invention, and it is not the thing that makes the world go round. The thing that makes the world go round comes clear very nicely in Psalm 24, verse 1, and of course many other places as well. But if you turn then to Lambeth 6, we read there in Psalm 24, verse 1, "The earth Hebrew eretz. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world, Hebrew table. The world and all that dwell therein. This in itself is of interest, but when this was translated into Greek for the Library of Alexandria by Hebrew scholars and rabbis for what is called the Septuagint, we read it this way now. The earth, G-E, from which we derive our word geology, is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The world, and here it's translated into the Greek word oikomene, from which we get our word ecumenical, and all that dwell in it. So the geological earth, the geophysical earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. The oikomene, or as we call it today, the biosphere, and all that dwell in it. This biosphere, within the context of the geophysical earth and its operations, is the global economy. And this is the divine economy, which Linnaeus defines in 1791. When we move from very specific application of religious principles to Anglicanism, which I do in this paper, in which I address the issues of covenant, which is a primary interest in not only Anglicanism but in Christian and Jewish thought, and also Eucharist or Holy Communion, which is very important in Anglicanism. When we move out from that to embrace all of Christianity, all of Judaism, and then even Islam, which adopts the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, what we discover is that in this broad faith tradition, the tradition of the people of the book, that we have a whole series of principles, biblical and scriptural principles in common. And if you look into other faiths, the other faiths of which I've mentioned 9, what you discover is that these are pretty broadly embraced. I list them on page 11 in the Yale paper. In summary, they're the earth-keeping principle, which would say we must keep the earth and biosphere with their dynamic integrity. I'll explain that in a little more detail as it's based on Genesis 2:15 in a moment. This parallels in science the statement and the understanding of the earth, which would say the integrity of the earth and the biosphere can be and is degraded by human action. So we know of these degradations through science, from the scriptures. We know that we must keep the earth and biosphere and their dynamic integrity. Another principle, the principle of fruitfulness, which again I'll unpack in a moment. We must behave in ways that assured continued fruitfulness and biodiversity. And this is paralleled with a scientific understanding that biodiversity and the flourishing of life can be diminished and degraded by human action. In fact, that's the big concern about species extinction. We know, we have data, we have great evidence that we destroy the diversity on Earth. Sabbath, a third principle, we must provide creatures and creation with times for restoration and regeneration. That includes ourselves, of course, because one of the beautiful things about the concept of creation is very different than the concept of the environment, because we can never talk about the creation versus us, as we might be able to talk about the environment versus us. We shouldn't. But when we talk about the creation, we also are including human beings. And so when we say we provide creatures and creation with times for restoration and regeneration, it clearly incorporates ourselves, but incorporates palm trees and rivers and and mountains and forests and prairies as well. And then what we learn in science, relentless exploitation of the earth and the biosphere can work and does work against their sustainability. Then a fourth principle, that of conservice. And this too, I'll say more about, but in summary, we must return service we derive from the earth and its creatures with our own service back to the earth. And scientifically, continuous taking from the earth and the biosphere degrades and tends to deplete it. So if you would then, I'd like you to go to the Lambeth paper where I unpack these four principles, and I begin to do that on page 5. They're more fully unpacked in the Yale paper, and you can look at that later when you have time to reflect and read. We'll deal first with, we're going to do them in a different order, the safeguarding principle, which is second here, is the earth-keeping principle, and then the fruitfulness principle and the Sabbath principle, and then the conservancy principle I dealt with last in the other paper. But I'll deal with it first here, and the reason is that it's from this concept that we get this all-embracing understanding of conservation. When we look at this particular biblical principle and scriptural principle, what we're doing is we're unpacking Genesis 2, verse 15. In Genesis 2:15, what we have there is a statement by God to Adam that he is to avad the garden and shamar it. These are the Hebrew words. And the avad word is translated usually to cultivate or to bring culture to or to tend. Its literal meaning is to serve. So that's really the first thing we should notice here, is that from this remarkable scripture, which runs across Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is that we are expected to serve the garden. Now, what's interesting as you investigate this as a theologian or scriptural scholar is that that you begin to understand that you must take these texts and turn them about, because what this text is doing is it's telling us something we do not know, and it's avoiding completely telling us what we do know about the garden versus us. What we do know, and it doesn't mention this at all, is that the garden serves us. It serves us with food. It serves us with beauty. It serves us with habitable microclimates. It serves us with perhaps fiber and medicines. But there's no mention made of it. The mention is made that we serve the garden. So what happens as you turn about this text is that you develop this idea of reciprocal service in the English language and in Francophone languages. The prefix con means with, and so it's a with service. It's a reciprocal service. It's a conservice. It's a conservation. It's a conservancy. And so conservation isn't just planting trees here or there. Conservation is returning the great service that we receive from the biosphere and from the whole creation with service of our own. And we serve in response to its service. In ecology and ecosystem sciences these days, we frequently identify what are called ecosystem services. These, for example, include the floodplains of rivers with their wetlands, which, if maintained with integrity, buffer floods from excessive flows, and also then release water during drought flows to maintain more evenly the flow of river systems. And if we violate these ecosystem services by basically destroying them, from building right to the water's edge, from destroying the riverine wetlands, what we do is we diminish those ecosystem services, thinking that our life is more important than the life of the river. But the conservation principle says that is a service to you. Return that service with service of your own, which is to maintain these great buffers on floods. And there's so many other things like this. Forests, of course, and prairies, and all of green life on Earth produce oxygen, even as they consume carbon dioxide. And that oxygen is a great ecosystem service to all of life that requires oxygen for oxygen consumption. So by serving the forest, by maintaining it, we also encourage and support and continue the service of creation in return. It's a conservice. The second principle I list here, the safeguarding principle or the earth-keeping principle, also comes from the same text, and it comes from elsewhere as well. But if we look at the other word that I mentioned, the word shamar, the Lord asked Adam to avad the garden and shamar it. Shamar means to safe keep. To keep not in a preservationist state, but keep with dynamic integrity. It's a kind of keeping that I apply to the keeping of the great wetland on which I live. It is not to maintain its water level at a particular point, because that's what the average is for wetlands. It's to let that water go up and down. It's to let the climate and the various weather systems to put that wetland through its paces, because what happens is that sometimes when it's very dry, seeds will sprout, and then when they flood, those seeds produce plants that really flourish. Drought and flood is very, very important for wetlands preservation. And so the keeping here is a dynamic keeping, not putting things like pickles in a jar, but keeping things more like you would keep a long-distance runner, by putting that runner through their paces rather than putting them in a padded cell to prevent them from damaging their knees between this race and the next. Keeping. It's interesting in the United States and in Canada, many police cars have on the side written a motto: to serve and to protect. Chicago police cars have that. Vancouver, British Columbia cars, Toronto cars have that, and it comes from Genesis 2:15. That's what a gardener of the city does. Garden comes from the word guard, and the gardeners of the city serve it and protect it. And I suppose it means that in these three cities at least we have Jewish police commissioners who make sure that biblical texts are carried by the police cars. The fruitfulness principle. Perhaps the most beautiful expression of fruitfulness principle is Genesis 6 through 9, the story of the flood. In it, what is recognized here is that the fruitfulness, the capacity of the creation to continue its lineages is absolutely crucial to caring for the earth, to living rightly on the earth. Because what is taught here is that each of these lineages is precious. So precious that Noah is asked to spend an immense amount of resource, immense amount of time, and also to endure the derision of all sorts of people who no doubt booed and hissed at him and laughed at him as he was building a boat on dry land. Preserving the lineages is very, very important. Elsewhere in the scripture, for example, in Ezekiel, we read in Ezekiel 34:18, "Is it not enough for you to feed on the green pastures? Must you also trample it with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink the pure water? Must you also foul the rest with your feet?" The idea is we may take from creation's fruit, but we may not destroy the capacity of the creation to bear fruit, to be fruitful. We may not degrade its fruitfulness. And then the Sabbath principle. In summary, it's that we should not relentlessly press anything, including ourselves. Everything should have a time to enjoy themselves for what they are created to be. And we learn this, of course, from Deuteronomy 5, Exodus 23, where we learn about the Sabbath for people. And the reason that's given is that God also took a Sabbath when God created the heavens and the earth. Interestingly, probably God was not tired, but he still kept the Sabbath because you have to stop to enjoy yourself and what you've made. You should not continue to go 24/7 just because it's good for business, because ultimately it's very bad for business. It destroys the economy of the creation. And we read about it also in Leviticus 25 and 26 and Exodus 23. In Exodus 23, the land is said to have to receive its Sabbath rest. And in Leviticus 25 and 26, it says, if you fail to observe these laws and ordinances, the land will take its own Sabbaths, the Sabbaths it had not when you dwelt upon it. Much like your body will take its own Sabbaths if you work 24/7, because eventually your body will say, that's enough, and I'll take over, and you will faint, and then you'll enjoy a Sabbath. Maybe for a long time. So sometimes I come to areas of the world and I look at the land and there aren't any people there. There's scrawny vegetation. There are evidence of people that have been there. The land has driven them off, and the land is taking its Sabbaths, the Sabbaths it had not when people were there. And many of our desert lands are like this. They're lands in Sabbath rest. And they're only in Sabbath rest now because the human occupants before failed to observe the Sabbath. So those are some of the ethical principles that come from the religious heritage that we have. The beautiful thing I think about Judaism is that it freely contributes these principles in those Hebrew scriptures to all other religions. And the beautiful thing about other religions is they have similar principles which we share across all of these different religions. We are not here in a battle of who's ethically right and who has come first to say that we should care for the earth. In fact, it's quite clear from Clarence Glacken's monumental work, Traces on the Rhodian Shore, in which he traces the whole idea of not Christian stewardship, but stewardship through the ages, from antiquity up into the 18th century. It's very clear that stewardship develops out of an interactive relationship between each individual human being and the earth. If you touch the earth and it is diminished, you get feedback from that. It's an experience. It's an experiment, perhaps. And what you do then is, if you're a responsible human being, is that you'll correct your actions. If you don't, you may not survive. Certainly your society will not survive for many generations. On the other hand, if as you touch the earth, maybe as an act of restoration, and things come back to support life, you tend to continue that. So this is something that's quite natural for us to do, as well as have this embedded in our various scriptures. The reason it's embedded in our scriptures is that all of us, over the ages, have come to know that sometimes things like dollars and pounds fog our vision. And before long, we displace an image of creation's economy with an image of a monetary economy, which may destroy our capacity to get feedback from what we're doing in creation. I'm just going to see if I happen to have touched all the points before we get into the science, ethics, praxis triad. So, and we have. So now for the core of my presentation, which is really quite brief, but really very key. And the core is this triad, which I already have referenced, which has at one corner the word science, or scientia, because scientia is the idea that I'm conveying here. It's all of knowledge, all of knowledge that has been gained from understanding and from trying to understand the creation. Ethics, which I've reviewed in terms of some of the biblical ethics and how those ethics also are embraced more widely, and praxis. So this is the science, ethics, praxis triad. And we're going to connect these and deal with the basic questions that are asked here. This asks the question, how does the world work? This asks the question, what ought to be? And this asks the question, then, what must we do? I think that with the specialization that we have experienced, particularly as simulated through fragmentation of the disciplines within the universities, with that fragmentation, we have lost many of the connections among science, ethics, and praxis. We have done that even within the disciplines. So I believe if I got the count right here for the University of Wisconsin and Madison, we have 18 different departments of biology. We have 1,000 biologists on the faculty. What we did innovatively here just a couple of years ago, we decided, we did not have this before, we decided to have a biology major. Because what happened, what was happening is that people who came in as undergraduates, beginning freshmen, had to decide whether they were going into genetics, bacteriology, botany, zoology, and they didn't know. I remember once talking to one of my students from Puerto Rico. He wanted to study biology, and he was majoring in genetics. And he said, "I'm so bad in mathematics. I like animals and so, but we haven't seen one yet." And so what we did is we created this, what was called an innovative program called biology. Isn't that something? And you can actually major in it now. You could not before. Well, let's look at natural science. There's no way that you can major in natural science. And what's happened in the history of the universities is that we have fragmented. We know how that happens. I know how we formed one of our genetics departments. We have 3. Because one of the persons won a Nobel Prize. And he says, I should have my own department. And they gave it to him. So what's interesting is that the rather natural progression or regression in our universities is to cut things into finer and finer pieces. many universities have cut things into such fine pieces that praxis is sent over to MIT, ethics is sent over to Westminster Seminary, and science is put off into some science and technology. Well, not science and technology, just a pure science program at the University of Michigan. So, or at Cambridge. And so the problem is that in our world, we have basically disconnected these in varying degrees. Sometimes these connections are just frayed. Sometimes they are broken. These are like ligaments. You know what a ligament is? I'll write it down here for people who are from other languages. A ligament, liga comes from Latin meaning to bind, to tie together, to ligate. And a ligament is connective tissue which binds bone to bone. So if you look at our foot, for example, the foot bones, there are many, are bound together by ligaments. They're also bound together by muscles. But the ligaments prevent the bones from going too far away from each other. And what we've done here is we've broken these ligaments, or we have fragmented them. And what we need is a religation. Ligation is a term that's used in surgery. When you ligate a blood vessel, you tie it and tie it off, and so it doesn't flow anymore. So if you have varicose veins, for example, and it's a one-day treatment, you go into the office and they make small cuts, tie off the veins, and you just leave veinless. Well, there no more blood flows into your varicose veins, and it's absolutely solved. Except maybe the blood's no longer getting back to your heart. It is internally, but ligation is a word. Ligation means to tie together, and religation means tie together again. And one of the beautiful things that we see in the word religion is religation. I remember when I was taking a religious course at my college, at Calvin College, when I was an undergraduate student. The professor of the course, teaching this course in religion, said, our religion is not a religion. It's not a faith. It is a way of life. That's what religion is. Religion is a way of life. And that means it includes science, ethics, and praxis. It's not just what you know and believe. It's what you do and say. And it is what you know with some certainty about how the world works. That's what religion is. So, in this sense, all of us need religion. Everybody needs religion. Religation, at least, because we have increasingly become a disjointed, fragmented society. Secularization, of course, is one of the consequences of this, because secularization takes this and it puts it into seminaries. It takes it right out of the university. At Cambridge, that hasn't been done yet, but in many institutions it has. So what's important to realize is that sometimes now, in the actions we see taken by people in the world, we move directly from science to praxis. For example, if your idea is to make as much money as you can take your knowledge of the world and practice in such a way that you'll maximize your return on the investment, and you don't have to look at this. On the other hand, you can go right from here to praxis. There's a famous senator in the United States, for example, who really believed that death was bad. And because of that, he advocated removing all dead wood from forests. Well, when you remove dead wood from forests, you deprive the forest of the next generation of soil on which the forest depends. Except the seed die, you know how it goes in Jesus' teaching. The forest depends on death for its life. In fact, the trophic dynamic ecology, which I was describing for you earlier on biotrophic degradation, that trophic ecology depends on death. We have to kill lettuce plants in order to eat their leaves. That's what happens. Salads are exercises in committing vegicide. So if you just go from ethics to praxis, you can get into a great deal of trouble. And then, of course, if you just do praxis by itself, you can also get into great trouble. I remember one day in my class, I was already lecturing, and I had one student who was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Youth Brigade. She was an anarchist. And I was lecturing right here, and there was a seat over there, and she stomped in front of me right in the middle of the lecture. You know, this is not generally the case for students, but she's an anarchist, right? And she's just stomping across, and she's saying, "I'm feeling so anti," and then she sits down. Well, was I disrupted? Yes, I was disrupted, and I said, "What are you anti?" And she says, "Give me anything, I'm against it." That's one kind of activist. Another kind of activist is the person that I co-chaired the Wisconsin Wetlands Association with. We were in a board meeting, and this was in the 1970s, and the board was talking about what will we do for our Wetlands Association, and I suggested we take a field trip. And the co-chair said, "Oh, that would be great. I've never been in a wetland." And I said, "How is it, Mike, that you've never been in a wetland?" He says, "Well, I know preserving wetlands is a good cause, and that's why I'm co-chair, but I really would like to see one." That's an activist. They're just active, but and he was kind of driven by ethics, but he has no knowledge. And in fact, so I turned to him and I said, "Don't you know that wetlands are places of bad air, malaria, the places that produce mosquitoes, and there are mires, and you can get bogged down there, and you can get mired in, and you can get totally swamped?" He said, "Oh no, they're beautiful places. You know, they're like pictures, masterpieces painted on the landscape." He had been kind of brainwashed, but of course they really are like that. But you have to come to that from experience, because your first experience is not that. The first experience is, this is a horrible place. That's why I study them, because I never meet anyone else there, and no one ever tells me what I should be doing. And the really effective scientists are the scientists who have no one breathing down their necks, telling them, "Don't do that instead." And that's why I became a wetland scientist, because no one else was there, and the wetland didn't talk back either, and it was a great place. So, putting this together then, is we have to know all three, and how do we do that? The church is very important. The world religions are very important. The synagogue, the congregation are very important. Those are the places, some of the very key places we can put this together. The legislators, the parliaments, the kings and queens of the world are important integrative points for bringing science, ethics, and praxis together. But they're being eroded in their capacity to see creation whole. They're being eroded by vested interests that go from science just to praxis, or go from ethics just to praxis. I mean, the thing that I see here, for example, is some of the struggle that we're looking at now in Iraq. Here is the kind of struggle we're looking from some major corporations and environmental decision making. We have to get things whole again. And why is this meeting so important? Why is this course so important? Because the major focus of this is to get the disjointed pieces reconnected. It really is to bring us all religation, religion.
Thank you, Cal. You'll be delighted to know that, I can't resist saying this, that at Cambridge you can't even apply to do biology or physics or chemistry. You have to apply for natural science. And I and others have fought this battle for years. You know, the computer scientists came along, they wanted a computer science transplant, said, no, you've got to do it for natural sciences. And I'm glad we did.
Now, is Cambridge a good university? The better university you are, the more you are religious.
We just have a long backlog, you can't change it. I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative because she talked a lot about this limb and this limb. I'm kind of wondering, what do you mean by breaking the limb between science and ethics? Isn't this the problem Galileo had in the church? They knew what ought to be, so they said when he found out what it was wrong. I mean, so can you just
sure.
reflect on that link, because I can't quite see what it is.
Sure. The linkage between science and ethics is extremely important, and I experience this as a scientist, because one of the things I do with my graduate students, the students who are working for their PhDs with me, is encourage them at this time of ecological crisis to do science-relevant policy or ethical relevant science. Let me explain. There's much that we can do these days in science, I'll give you a little anecdote, because when I was finishing my graduate work at the University of Michigan, I start listing all the ideas I could work on. And it got to about 18, and it got up to about 38, and then it got up to 102, and then it got up to 1,005. And I thought, wow, you need many, many lifetimes to do this stuff. If you have a curious mind, you're going to be, there's just too much to study. So in this time of ecological crisis, what I'm suggesting to my students do is to do policy-relevant science or ethically relevant science. Now, by that, I don't mean that they have to study ethics, but for example, what many of my students have done over the last couple of decades is to deal with the ecosystem services that wetlands provide. You know, what do they really do in nature? What does a wetland do? What you discover, of course, is that they are doing so many important things. Relating to the hydrologic cycle, relating, as I mentioned, to floods and to droughts, relating to the removal of nutrients from uplands before they get into surface water, relating to migratory birds that go cross continents. Some of them go 10,000, 12,000 miles migration per year and stop at these places. Wetlands are some of the most biologically productive systems on Earth. One wetland, for example, in the Midwest, will produce as much biomass as heavily fertilized cornfields. And the wildlife depend on this during their migration. So the wetlands also tend to be major fisheries production areas. These are often the places that the adult fish lay their eggs, and the fry live for the first weeks, months, and perhaps years before they get out into the real world and get eaten. Wetlands are very nice for that. So the answer is do ethically relevant science if you can. I think I'm really a pure scientist. I just love to just work with the pure stuff, and I do. But I'm often shaped by what's going to help my neighboring town in terms of preventing them from destroying the lake that's nearby through their development. So that's one direction. Of course, science can affect ethics as well, and that is that sometimes there are ethicists who don't know how the world works. And they say, you know what a zooplankton is? A zooplankton is a small, usually they're crustaceans, and they eat algae. And they depend on algae. But some ethicist theories you would take and you'd apply it and say to all the zooplankton in the world, you can't eat anymore because death is bad. You don't want to do that. It's a real exaggeration. There are probably no ethicists that would do this. That's why I raised the question, because I don't step on anybody's toes, or I step on all of them. And but an ethicist sometimes, without knowledge of how the world works, can say tigers ought not to be. They may not know they've said that, but when they're advocating vegetarianism out of respect for life, they might deny tigers. Now, we solved that problem in our house, Ruth and I. We have Cleo the cat, and we feed it Purina cat chow, which is just made out of vegetables. But it has beef flavoring, which is artificially created. So, and anyway, that's an exaggerated response.
Any comments or questions?
I just have a short comment on the thing that I talked about. Isn't also an important link between science and ethics that science somehow fuels the worldview that we have, how the world works in general, and the worldview and ethics are very closely related.
Yes.
How are we related to nature? So I would.
Yes.
I actually use this triangle where I, instead of ethics, write worldview.
Yes. Well, there is a sense in which this whole thing together forms our worldview, because the worldview comes from the interaction of what we know, what we believe should be, and what we do. And a really dynamic life is continually inspecting that worldview and making the modifications that bring it into greater accord with what we know about the world and what we know about what ought to be. So I think worldview is right on target here. Also, if we look at this term, I know someone's here from the Netherlands, so this would be Wetenschap, right? Or Germany, Wissenschaft. It's all, or at Cambridge, perhaps natural philosophy here, and so this is a very rich body of knowledge gained not only from the sciences, but gained from our experience of gardening, of petting the cat, and taking care of our children.
It's kind of an extra dimension, really. I'm thinking about this triad you've got here, which is the problem that praxis is often prevented by politics, if you'll excuse the iteration. And I was wondering, what can we do to kind of put in another limb which enables praxis to happen? I don't know if it's despite of or through, or whatever the right word is to use, but with politics.
Yeah. My response to that is, since politics is certainly critical here, that this really forms a framework for the training and education of a politician, not only prior to their being a politician, but all the time while they're being a politician. And one of my bad experiences sometimes with politicians is they don't have enough time anymore to look at the science or look at the ethics. They have to act. And that comes back to my anarchist student, is there are some politicians that act like anarchists, but the disguise they wear is that they know everything about science and everything about ethics, and then they act. So that's where, of course, the precautionary principle comes in. There are some politicians who will not act because it's not an appropriate time. because they have to gather more information. And of course that's very important. So one of the things I think we have to do in democratic societies is when we see instant solutions, we should say, aha, it's a non-solution. Instant solutions almost always are non-solutions. I don't know how we embed this into our political system. Maybe we do it by having a queen who lives long, and you know, just rearranges the furniture just right in Windsor Castle, and somehow sets an ethical, scientific, and behavioral standard that we tend not to want to violate.
But we do it by having bodies outside of government, because government only lasts 4 years.
Yeah.
And they have a mandate, but they're outside of government, not creature.
And that's where religious
Maybe
traditions,
it's a son.
religious traditions are very important here too. Then.
Dennis.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that, and I was wondering if you would like to give as an exemplar this conference that happened in Oxford in 2002, and actually what came out of that. I'm remembering you're on film also, but you know, just in general terms, you know, how that worked, because I think that had a big political impact. So
Yes, it did. It was.
So I think people would be interested to hear that, how it sort of worked out.
There's a volume here. I'll just borrow a copy. This volume, Environmental Stewardship, comes out of a meeting organized by the John Array Initiative at Windsor Castle. And I was asked, along with 3 others, to give a presentation that would help them discover the worth or whatever of the concept of environmental stewardship. And when the conference was chaired by Sir John Houghton and Professor Sam Berry, and after the conference was over, Sir John and I found ourselves together alone and kind of looked at each other and said, hey, should we take the long walk? And we did. It's about a 3-mile walk out from the castle. And as we're walking out, we basically we came to this idea that we should discover for ourselves what we should do next in life. And what we thought was it might be best for us to bring a whole lot of people together to bridge some of these great gaps. And over what topic? And by the time we went 3 miles and were about ready to take the 3-mile walk back, we decided it would be on climate. And by the time we came all the way back to the castle, we decided we'd have a forum in England in 2002 in the summer on climate change. And what we would do there is we would bring leading world climatologists, climate scientists, together with leading world evangelicals, particularly focused on U.S. policy, which was being very much shaped by evangelicals, and bring them together. Well, we did that, and now on a website entitled www.climateforum2002.org, you can read the consequences of that, climateforum2002.org. We issued what's called the Oxford Declaration on Climate Change. It was signed by 60 of us who were there. And the purpose of that meeting, in part, was to have major evangelical leaders get turned around by the conference. And one of these that was Richard Cizik, C-I-Z-I-K. And he is vice president of the National Association of Evangelicals in North America, NAE. And he said that forum was very much like his conversion to Christ, but it was conversion to understanding the science of climate change. And so what he did was he brought that message back to the NAE, which has about 60 million members, is very influential. And this, in short, has reshaped American politics to a very large extent, because evangelicals have a very large voice. Already in the November elections last year, it had its impacts, but it's certainly going to be very, very great this year. So here, Sir John and I, both scientists, he is an atmospheric physicist and I as an environmental scientist, are thinking religiously, ethically about our fields and decide that a major thing we should do is to bring these people together. Now what also happened from that is Richard Cizik met with E.O. Wilson, and Bob White began with a cover of E.O. Wilson's book, The Creation. I had had long discussions with E.O. Wilson. In January of 2006, I introduced him at a major talk at the University of Wisconsin, and I asked him if he would mind if I would present him as a person who was advocating the care of creation. Could I use the word creation? He said, oh, I like that word, please do. And we discussed it more, and he says, I'm producing a book on that in September. And what both of us discovered is we both wanted to reintroduce the word, the phrase, the creation, into the scientific and religious vocabulary. It had been shanghaied, with pardon to the Chinese here. It had been diverted by the creationists. So that's why he produced this book, The Creation. And in December, in late November, early December, we met at a plantation, 28 of us, 14 scientists and 14 religious leaders, just for conversation to see if we could bring this together. And we discovered within a few hours we liked each other, and we wrote a joint declaration, and then on January 17, we issued an urgent call to action across evangelical Christianity in America and the secular scientists. That's had immense impact. And so we have joined together E.O. Wilson, probably the world's leading evolutionary biologist, kind of a living Darwin, and Peter Raven, an expert on biodiversity, and Jim McCarthy, the current president of the AAAS, Rita Colwell, past president of the AAAS and past director of the National Science Foundation, and a whole string of others like that, speaking to the scientific and to the evangelical community, and more broadly to the entire American community and beyond. And that's been very, very helpful. So there's a big transformation taking place in America. Mr. Bush is rather surprised by some of these things, and the Republicans that are running for office are looking at their constituents who are largely evangelicals and saying, wow, I guess we have to look at creation care. So it's very effective, and so what's happened is this reunification, this religation has actually created a ligation here with Praxis.
Just before we take the next question, I just want to tell you there will be a fire alarm at 12:30, and it's a virtual fire, so we can ignore it. I mean, I know people always ignore fire alarms, but you really can this time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned American evangelicals. Could you just reflect on the sort of theology that regards degradation as inevitable? The 2 Peter stuff about all this shall be dissolved, so why should we bother? The sort of theology that the world is coming to an end and the Lord is returning, so why should we bother? Let's rejoice. That sort of degradation is rather different from the tone of hope that we had from Bob earlier.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Bishop. That's I appreciate that, and there are several different approaches. One of the first approach I use with the very, very conservative people and say, do you take care of your teeth? And I'll say, why, of course. And I say, why would you do that? You're only going to live to be 3 score years and 10, or by reason of strength, fourscore years, let your teeth rot. Oh, I never do that. Then I will go to say that when we build skyscrapers now in America, before you start your building, you must file not only a building plan, but a demolition plan. Because these buildings are so big, a great problem is how you take them down when you finally decide to do it. And so in New York City, you actually have to file a demolition plan. So we have building after building with plans to demolish. And so what I say to them is, we ought to go to those buildings and we can just take pictures off the wall and mess up the floor and, you know, take out desks. No, we can't do that. And then I ask them, why can't we? And they don't know. And I'll say, when you figure that out, you'll know why we can't destroy creation. So that's number one. Number two approach is, let's read together Revelation 11:18. Revelation 11:18 is heralded in Handel's Messiah. The trumpet shall sound, da 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 da. You know that? All of us know it. And the passage goes like this: the time has come for rewarding the saints, dot dot dot, and for destroying those who destroy the earth. And what I do is, I sometimes, if I know I'm actually going to confront people in an audience like this, I have whiteout in my pocket, and I say, "Do you have a Bible? We'll just white that out." They say, "Oh no, I'm for biblical inerrancy." I say, "Well, you have whited that out. You don't need my pen. You already have whited that out because you don't believe that." All discussion stops. That's another approach. And now you've got a more intellectual person, and it says in 2 Peter and elsewhere, as people were destroyed in the flood, so will people be destroyed in the last time, something like that. And I'll say, so, who was destroyed? And they say, well, all the sinful people. Where did they go? Oh, they went to hell or something. Who stayed on the earth? Adam. Not Adam. Noah. And then I'll say, let's look at this passage. 2 men are at the wheel, and one was left and one was taken. Which one was taken? The bad one or the good one? They say, well, the good one was taken. I said, just like in the times of Noah. Oh. So does it say which one was taken? Well, let's read this again. No, it doesn't. Oh my goodness. I mean, maybe the good one is going to stay at the wheel. That's an interesting thought. Actually, there's very good reason to interpret it that way, because as people join Jesus in the air, he's coming to establish his kingdom. And some thinks he's going to come to just the border out there and then leave with all these people. But there's no indication that if you're coming, that you're not going to land. So that's another approach, and it's the fourth approach is look at Habakkuk and look at the 2 Peter language. Habakkuk talks about the refiner's fire. Remember how in Handel's Messiah again, blessed be he, is reference to he is like a refiner's fire. Malachi. And we just shifted books. So when you read the 2 Peter, the elements are going to be destroyed, just like the earth was destroyed. Well, the earth wasn't destroyed. And the elements, the periodic table of the elements, came quite a bit later. You know, I used to think as a child that it was calcium and oxygen and so on that would be destroyed, and it's going to be destroyed like the earth was already destroyed in the flood. So one of the areas of my expertise is fire ecology. In fact, what we do as we're trying to reestablish the North American prairie is we use fire, and we use it as a refiner's fire. And what happens is we get rid of all these Eurasian plants by putting these prairies to fire. And the dandelions go, and the thistles go. That is fire ecology, which is very recent as an ecological subject, is probably what it's talking about. Now, the new earth that's referenced could use the Greek neos for new, and it doesn't. It uses the Greek kainos, which means new again. It's kind of like renewed. And so it's what's happening in fundamentalism is the fundamentalists are very interested in America. They can turn on a dime because they're used to converting. And so...
Can you translate that for us? I don't know what that means.
Turn on a dime?
On a penny.
Turn on a penny. Well, here's a dime. This is a dime. They're thinner than a penny. And if you're coming this way and you can turn a dime, it's a very abrupt turn because this is the radius. That's what the idea is. Yeah, that's a bad. I shouldn't have used that idiom, but so I recall Pastor Reverend Try Robinson being asked a question in his church about the rapture, which he was preaching about 10 years earlier, and he says, "Oh, we don't believe that anymore." That's the difference between a fundamentalist or an evangelical and an Anglican. As an Anglican can say, "This is what we've believed, and we've only believed it for hundreds of years." You don't turn that around. But when you're dealing only with the Bible and you don't have creeds and you don't have traditions, you can cast off things that you misinterpreted. So that's an interesting characteristic. It happened in the 1970s, mid-1970s, when many of us were speaking about world hunger and the need to deal with the poor, and the objections were that Jesus said, "The poor you always will have with you." That argument was undermined immediately, and the churches in America quickly undertook world hunger programs. So what we're in the process of, I think, is a great conversion. And it's conversion by, in this particular case, by biblical teaching. The Bible's very powerful amongst people who have nothing else but the Bible as their rule of faith and practice. Now the main lines, which are more traditional and more doctrinal, already had turned around, but they just couldn't convince the people to do it. The hierarchy has turned around, but the people are embedded in the culture, and so they've been working hard to make that turnabout. But that's happening too within the main line.